Greetings, everyone. My name is Adil Najam. I am the Dean of the Pardee School of Global Studies here at Boston University, and I welcome you on behalf of the Pardee Center for the Study of the Longer Range Future. This is the second episode in our new series called The Future Of, where we talk to leaders in fields that are likely to have really big impacts or big changes coming up in the future. And today we'll be talking about the future of the university, the future of higher education, the future of higher education here in the US, but also in the world. And I am delighted to have with me an absolutely brilliant and wonderful panel. And I won't go into too much detail, but I do hope you will look up our website and learn more about them. I have with me Dr. Barbara Snyder. Barbara was until very recently, until the start of this pandemic, the president of Case Western University. And since then, she is now the president of AAU, the Association of American Universities. I have with me Phil Baty. Phil Baty is the chief knowledge officer of Times Higher Education. He joins us from Europe. We have Scott Jaschik. Scott is one of the founders of Inside Higher Education, one of the leading publications on higher education here in the US and across the world. And finally, I am joined by my colleague, Ken Elmore. Ken is the Dean of Students here at Boston University. So we have a wide range of expertise here, and I'm delighted that you've all been able to join us. So let me just throw the big question out. You know, everyone kind of gets a sense that higher education universities are at this point of transformation. And people aren't using that word transformation lightly. It's not simply a word anymore, but there is this sense you can feel in your bones that we are ready for change. And for some people, that's threatening. For some people, it is exciting. Some change could be threatening, some could be exciting. So that's the conversation we want to have. So let me throw out the big question. And Barbara, if I could start with you. What keeps you up at night? Hopefully nothing keeps you up at night, but when you think of change in the sector, what are the big challenges or opportunities you see?
As is often the case, the big challenge is also the big opportunity. And I think as we think about the role of research universities, it's the opportunity to take what we've learned from the pandemic. And I would say universities and colleges have learned a lot during this period of time. And I want to talk a little bit about education and also about research. Technology has allowed us to deliver education through remote delivery methods and limited contact methods. And one of the questions is, how do we do that? How do we take what we've learned in that context and use it to change the university in the future? And I would say it's in some ways it's about disruption in our industry. And then the same is true with research. We want to be able to think about how research has changed as well because of the pandemic, and use that knowledge and try to do things better. On the education front, I will say that we have seen students still want an in-person experience, many students. We've seen on campuses across the country, students flock to live on or near the campus, even during the pandemic when most classes were being delivered online. And in some cases, all classes that we're taking were being delivered online. So we know that students still want, at least some students still want an in-person experience. But what about students who can't get to our campuses for a variety of reasons? So will we be able to take what we've learned during the pandemic and broaden our reach, be able to bring in students virtually who never could come to our campus for a variety of reasons? Can we use technology to make our programs more affordable? So accessibility and affordability, can we try to take what we've learned and address those two things that have long been challenges for higher education? On the research front, I hate to say there's a silver lining to the pandemic, but I'm going to say that because it's terrible, but there is something good that has come out of this, at least for science and for research. And that is that at this time when we've seen so much sort of anti-intellectual, anti-science push in our country, there has been a real craving for expertise. And you see it every day. If you watch any, I don't care what television network you watch, it can be Fox, it can be CNN, it doesn't matter. You see faculty experts from research universities all over this country. And the reason they're on is because people want to hear from them. They're quoted in all the leading publications as well. So AAU had decided to seize this moment where the public is more receptive to messages about the value of science and try to call attention to the fact that research universities are making a big difference in our country and always have. So we developed some ads for television and digital that share real life stories from our member universities about how their research has contributed to the fight against COVID, to the development of vaccines and therapies. And one of our challenges is, of course, that we've seen federal funding for research erode as a percentage of GDP from 1.9% in 1964 to 0.62% in 2018. And that's a challenge for our competitiveness. So we're hoping that the pandemic gives us an opportunity to bring people together around the value of science. And so I hope that we can seize this moment of challenge and opportunity to help the public understand how critical public investment is in our nation's research enterprise for the future of our country.
Thank you. Thank you. A lot of good stuff there, which we want to unpack. Particularly, you mentioned accessibility, you mentioned affordability. Those are issues not just here in the US, but across the world. And Phil, if I can come to you, Barbara pointed out it's a moment of disruption. And our Silicon Valley friends make disruption sound like fun. But the fact is, disruption is disruptive, right? Our students have learned that, our faculty has learned that. Teaching in your kitchen while if you're a young parent and taking care of your own kids who don't have school, doing this on Zoom is not easy for a faculty member. It puts a lot of pressure, disruption. Same for the students. And across the world, differing accessibility to the internet and so on and so forth. But I only mentioned that. What do you see when you see the long-term change, not just in this pandemic moment, but whatever it leads to in the future?
I think I completely agree with what Barbara's saying. There's a lot to unpick there. For me, there is a real sense that we've proven, I think once and for all, that it's a myth that universities are slow to change. We've got all the best assets of 800, 900 years of history, if not longer in some cases. This idea that there's a cliche, I love to repeat this line, that universities can change the course of history through their knowledge creation, through their inventions and innovations, but they can't change a history course because there's too much bureaucracy, they don't get things done, they can't act quickly enough. We've proven that universities can be very, very agile, very responsive. And we've also proven, I think, that universities are a profound force for public good. Unbelievable, the response to the pandemic. We've created and rolled out vaccines within a year, a decade-long process. We've delivered online education to millions of students almost overnight. And not just the cliche of the student in the basement with a Zoom lecture. They're actually, people are integrating really solid, smart digital technology into their teaching and learning to the benefit of the students. And particularly, I think in some countries, they've said that the screens have become a bridge. They've actually encouraged and increased student engagement. Places like Japan and China, they've seen really positive benefits from digital, which could move into a blended learning environment. So loads of really positive things from what is obviously a terrible, terrible global tragedy. I think for me, I would hone in on the sort of opportunity side being a sort of almost a reset of that social compact that universities have with their communities, both on the ground at a national level, all across the world. We've seen the rise of anti-democratic forces, authoritarianism in Brazil. Of course, things have changed in the US recently, but we had Trump imposed, we've had the Brexit problems in the UK. They're all sort of anti-truth, anti-fact, anti-evidence, and anti-university movements. There's almost like a deliberate push away from critical thinking and away from the skills universities engender. So I think we get to renegotiate that social compact and prove the value of universities, and very much to Barbara's point, reassert our role as a fantastic public good, which I think is really important, resetting that relationship. And then I just take that one level beyond and say, at the global level, I also think universities need to retain their power as global bridges. You know, we've seen alongside these domestic attacks on universities, we've seen the rise of scientific protectionism and basically xenophobia in many cases. But we know from the pandemic that we don't solve the world's biggest problems by being nationalistic with our science, being nationalistic with our research collaboration. So keeping those bridges open, universities transcend geopolitics, we share ideas. The sharing of data was huge in the pandemic response, but sharing knowledge for climate change, tackling these issues together, food security, poverty. So for me, it's that kind of the public good at the national level, but also really reasserting that at the global level and keeping those global exchanges and collaborations as open as possible. And universities can be key to that.
So Scott, we have cheerleading for universities, which is music to my ears, but there is this sense in the air of foreboding also.
Yes, there certainly is. At the university level, pretty much at the AAU level, where Barbara's organization, things are going well. I mean, you hate to say it, but the universities are coming out of the pandemic with renewed respect, with Biden in office, with better rhetoric in the United States, and better policies. He's spending money on them. The universities need more money, but fundamentally, they are going to survive. They are really, they're well run. Look at the endowments, Wall Street. Look at what's going on there.
And
the
Scott,
problem, but
just to cut you, so that for those who may not know, when you say AAU level, you mean AAU is an association of the top research.
Right. Yes. Yes.
We at Boston University very proud to be one of them.
Yes. And so I don't mean to imply that they are not hurting because of the pandemic. Everyone's hurting, but they aren't hurting as much as community colleges, as regional public colleges, as small unknown private colleges. They are the real victims, so to say, of the pandemic. They have lost in admissions is very important. In admissions, the research universities are doing great. They've got lots of applications. No one knows quite what this year will bring, but if you've got lots of applications, people want to attend your university, public and private alike. But community colleges, enrollment is down and applications are down. Regional publics, down. And, the reasons for this are, it is much harder if you are a community college student to do the things that an AAU student does. The pandemic is a great way for an MIT student to show off her skills, and she can, do all those things. At many community colleges have put their Wi-Fi in their parking lots so that students can come at night and park and do homework in their cars. That's, because they don't have good wireless at home. And that's the reality that we're looking at. Look at the decline in FAFSA, in financial aid application completion rates. Look at the fights over the faculty rights that are primarily going on at non-research universities. I see the next few years as a real dividing time between the research universities, which are going to do well, and everyone else. And it really raises a tough choice for the research universities of how will they contribute to everyone coming out and doing well, because the research universities can't take every student, and there's not room for them. They aren't going to attend every student, but some students who start at community college are going to end up at a research university, and so the deterioration of the community colleges matters, and I think we're going to see more attention to that.
Thank you. We are again sort of setting the table for the conversation, and at some point I do want to come back to Phil on this and ask sort of, what's the shakeup internationally? But there's clearly this sense that there isn't a higher education sector. There are multiple higher
Yes.
education sectors, and they will be impacted differently. And Ken, just to finish this round, sort of, we talk of universities, but universities aren't just buildings and degree programs. There are people, there are faculty, but there are students,
Right.
and there are parents who have invested in those students. And this has not been an easy time. This has been disruptive for that community. Of young people that you are on the front line of. What do we learn?
Well, I mean, we certainly learned quite a bit, and I think to sort of carry on a little bit to where this conversation's been going, really thinking about education in its fullest as not just a good for the democracy, but good for a pluralistic society. I mean, I think that's in essence what we're seeing here. There are these things, and I'd add to what Scott said. This is not just about research universities, but this is about elite research spaces, and that carries over into society. And I wonder if we've learned, because we face so much with things like SAT scores, athletic indexes, those sorts of things. And I wonder if the ideas and measures for success from what the society wants from a university has changed. And also when we start to think about recruiting, we start to think about K through 12 students, we start to think about racial and income disparities, then, research that matters has to be something that drives both conversations, but also investments. Scott said we can't take everybody, but we could probably advocate for every student in some way, because we've got that power to do that. I've learned and see that the future is that the university more and more is going to have to own its place as a socialization space, if you will. A place where we've got to think about closing class gaps, social class gaps. I mean, I see so much of that with our students, in part because we can afford to bring poor people to a place like Boston University and in our spaces. But that means also that there's got to be a level of social engagement and integration within the space that students want to get back to. Students want to get back to these spaces in part because they want to get rid of their parents and away from their parents, but they also want to get into these spaces because they're safer with COVID. They're safer places, but even more so. And this is where I think we sometimes don't have the sort of concerted effort that we need, but they need that socialization. They want to be able to form the networks and everything else that's there. I also think that amongst us as the elite, we've got to think about how on behalf of the society, we can advocate for young people, not just for ourselves, right? We advocate for young people to get them here, the best. But we got to advocate for the society about young people and their trends and their lifestyles, their behaviors, and to make sure that we say that these are going to be places where these big conversations like this and these ideas and possibilities are out there. So, the research that matter has to also be the research for the democratic society that drives conversations. It's got to drive investments. And, I'd be remiss by not saying that we're also in this place too, where research universities from the standpoint of a college student or a graduate student, undergraduate, graduate student, is a place too where they're saying, we need you to speak as a part of this too. We need you to be further engaged in society. So I think the future of a university is that we speak, that we fight. I think the 4 years under Trump saw a university community was incredibly disappointed with all of us because we didn't fight, because we didn't speak, because we didn't teach them to be warriors in the society. And we know that there is a certain critique of structural racism. Some of us took more of a conservative critique to it. Some of us took more of a progressive critique to it. But we did it in such a subtle way that nothing really changed in a lot of people's minds. And now we are seeing that more of the conversation about racial justice has a direct programming and policy role. What's more, I think ultimately, I think students want us to make sure that after this pandemic, we maintain our souls. I think that's an important piece.
So I'm going to pick up on that last piece about maintaining our soul and what that means. You've all said it, but said it more politely. But this point that, Ken, you were making, universities don't exist in a vacuum. They shouldn't. They never have. And we live in a world of turmoil, whether it is issues of race, of diversity, of justice, of democracy, of voice, of freedom. And this is not just the US. So, this week, the news from India was about academic freedom and people being removed from their jobs because their views were deemed too tough, or from Pakistan, which is the country I'm originally from, events being cancelled because the topic might have been too difficult to talk about. And we can all relate to those, right? So suddenly all across the world, there is this intellectual moment, which is not just COVID. So to get us to that place, if you allow me, rather than ask a question, let me put a 2-minute clip of something we did here at the Pardee Center during the last year. We talked to a lot of experts, 101 experts, on what the world after COVID might look like. So I want to bring us to after COVID by showing you a little, literally 2-minute clip on what people think the world that we will be in might look like, and then ask you what you think that means for us in higher education.
There will not be a single sector of society untouched by this pandemic. There will not be a single activity that goes on as it once did.
We'll see disparities emerge among those who are connected and those who are not. Being disconnected in the world of COVID was bad. Being disconnected after the world of COVID will be worse.
I think one thing that COVID has done is it's brought technology into spaces where it never was before.
As a result of COVID-19, we're gonna have robots everywhere.
I think every business will be a digital business.
Zoom has become a verb. The question is how this will change our working lives. This whole notion of work from home, while it's been really good for a lot of people, I do think we need to be very cautious and pay a lot of attention to what's happening in particular for women.
Is every university going to become Zoom university in the future?
I think we can be really clear and say that global higher education will change profoundly, and I do think it will change forever.
This is going to be a long-term recovery effort, trying to rebuild cities in a way that emphasizes health, safety, inclusivity, justice, and resilience. That's where I think we have to go.
I hope that literature could give us the logic and the feeling to really strive for communitarian bonds.
This moment is helping us realize how important and key and necessary the arts are to our very core being.
I think more people will appreciate the primacy of public health as the undergirding of our civil society.
We have an opportunity here to break down the barriers that continue to haunt our discussion about mental health.
There are things that could be done. There's no reason why we can't rise to the level of other developed countries and indeed many underdeveloped ones, and introduce a humane system of universal health care.
Epidemics bring out the worst and the best in people. People become threatened, they become worried, but then there are people who see a fire and they take a bucket and they run towards it. Epidemics at least give us hope that there is this higher level that we can all aspire to.
There will not be a single sector of society untouched by this pandemic. There will not be a single activity.
So let me come back to this, and Barbara, I'll start with, in the series we talked to a lot of, a lot of it was about economics and politics, and we're talking to the UN Secretary General and Prime Ministers. But what the clip you saw was talking about is that the world after COVID, people think, is going to be fundamentally different. Our friend Phil Baty says universities will change profoundly and change forever. Is he exaggerating?
I was slightly caught up in the moment there, but sorry, I'll let you go.
Well, in some ways, I hope they will, because I mentioned the opportunities we have to do better than we've done in the past in so many ways. In some ways, though, I do hope we don't lose some of the things that are valuable about the education and the research and our opportunities to do good things in the communities and more broadly, because I think that's a serious responsibility of all research universities. And Scott mentioned that some of the higher ed sector is struggling right now, and he's right about that. And I think we all view ourselves as having a responsibility to help the sector stay strong as well, because he's absolutely right. The members of my organization could not possibly educate all students And they also depend on many other parts of higher education to bring great things to the whole sector that makes them better too. We all are better when community colleges are strong. We get students from community colleges. We're all better when liberal arts colleges are strong. We get students from liberal arts colleges too. And we send people to those places as well. So it's a very interconnected network. It's one of the things that makes American higher education, I think, so special and so strong. So I do think a lot of things will be different. I hope they will be different. I hope that this is our opportunity to tackle some issues around, as I said, affordability and accessibility that we have not done as well with as we need to do. And I also hope it's an opportunity to help demonstrate the public good that research universities provide. One of my favorite stories is actually about vaccine development, which everybody is saying, oh, it's so great that these scientists at Pfizer and Moderna and the other pharma companies have done this so quickly. And that's true. But the truth is that take the first two vaccines that were built on the mRNA platform. That platform was developed by federally funded research at research universities over decades. It didn't just happen in a year. They built on that platform, which had never been used to launch a vaccine successfully until now. But that platform was available because of the work of scientists at research universities, not just our members, globally too, and also at places like the NIH, where these scientists have been working for many years on these things that have finally paid off. So one of the opportunities here too is to tell the story of fundamental research, basic research. And it's hard to make an investment in that because the needs are so great right now. But those long-term investments pay off in ways that you can't foresee. And that's why we're involved in trying to tell that story. And I hope that that can be different as a result of the learning from the pandemic, in addition to the things I mentioned about education. So I hope some things will be different. I hope many things will be better. I also hope we don't lose some of the things that have made the American higher education system truly, I think it's the envy of the world. Okay, I'm biased. Phil, you can take me down for that one, but I think we've got a lot of good things, and I want to make sure that in this time of disruption, we try to do the best job we can of addressing the things we can address. And Ken talked about the reckoning around racial justice. We have to use the tools we have to make this an opportunity to make lasting change. If we don't, I personally will feel it's a huge failure.
Are we ready to do that? Do we have the tools? Are we up to this moment?
Well,
I'm going to say no.
I believe we are, but we have still a lot of work to do. I'm not saying it's, we're ready right this second.
Yeah, Adil, I'm going to jump in and say no. I mean, we've had these opportunities before. And I think that part of what we do is we do half of the equation, and we half the equation is using technology, but then we become beholden to it. And then we don't do a really good job at telling those stories. What's more, I love the term reckoning. I think that we've got to put things into play, but we also have to do the reckoning as well. Look, there's a big conversation right now about the use of the SAT for these big elite places like we are. And personally, the future says to me, I hope that we get rid of that. And we've got to think differently about it because we know it's on a feet of racist clay. But what we should do is not just get rid of it. We should use our research, our knowledge, and everything that we've got to also do a public reckoning of it, so the public understands why we're trying to be good civic institutions that are promoting, again, that pluralistic democratic society. So I think we've had these opportunities before, and I wonder if now this has been the war that we come after, sort of the after times on, and now we say, okay, we know we've got to do this different. It's gonna not always look fair. It's gonna look different, but we got to do it.
I want to come to Phil in a minute about faculty, but Scott, if I can, just on this, how does the rest of society look at universities when they hear us talk like this? Do they see universities as having risen to the moment, or are we the new banks, institutions with big pillars? Or are we a bit of both? Because I agree with Barbara, it has been amazing to see that investment in knowledge and ideas being put to use. But I sometimes wonder what people in society are thinking of us as they look at universities in this moment.
They're not thinking like Barbara and you. I want to agree with Ken very much that we may have the tools, but we are not using them. Look at the discussions of race since the pandemic took place. Many universities will change the name of a building from somebody who was racist to somebody who's not. Universities all over the country are renaming things to honor people who are in the civil rights movement. That's all great, but universities are not dealing with the reality of what it's like to be a Black student or a Latino student at those universities. Go to social media, go anywhere, and you will see those students are very, very unhappy and they are constantly mistreated. And that, then to get to your question, I think that the public doesn't see the good that comes out of universities. Unquestionably, they do the vaccine work, they do the work that's curing cancer, all this stuff. Most people view universities, except when their kids are getting in, as expensive places where some funny stuff they don't quite understand goes on. And that's a shame.
Why don't they? Because we aren't telling our story right? Or because they are seeing a different story?
They're seeing a different story. I mean, I don't want to say universities aren't telling their story right, but they need to tell their story in different ways. They need to talk about, why, not just why it's important to cure cancer, but why it's important to study a different society than our own. A lot of universities are doing that, but they're not necessarily talking about it. And that's what gets them into trouble, because they don't know how to talk about that.
People who are watching or listening to this, I think we have over 100 people right now. Please do put in your questions. You can put them on YouTube or on Twitter, and we'll pass them along. But Phil, take us global and take us to what this means to faculty.
Well, there's so many really great points I'd love to just pick up on. First of all, Barbara, the US university sector is, of course, the envy of the world. Certainly your members, most of the rest of the world has been trying to copy the model. But I do think that gives your member institutions a huge responsibility, a social responsibility, as I think, as we often call it, the society's conscience and society's critic. That means, speaking truth to power. That means pushing forward critical thinking. And perhaps now post-pandemic, that means taking more of a strong position in trying to hold people to account for the really serious social problems we've witnessed globally through the pandemic. Those deep inequalities, in particular, being the most potent, really terrible thing that's come out of this pandemic. But I think, to speak to Scott's point and to Ken's point around, it's not the great work that universities do is not seen, it's not understood. I do think Ken's point about how we measure success is something we have to really look at. And I have to take a lot of responsibility for having developed the World University Rankings, which have perhaps fetishized the great American research universities as the global gold standard. I'm not suggesting for a second they are not outstandingly powerful, important institutions, but perhaps some of the things we use to recognize success, not times higher in this case, but exclusivity at entry, rejection rates, SAT scores, all these things that we associate with prestige, perhaps we should be rethinking. And obviously from Times Higher's perspective, it's scholarly research at the most highly impactful level in the most prestigious journals, where there's the greatest sort of cumulative reputation that may come from centuries of history, may come from the financial power to hire the greatest faculty in the world and bring them all to your campus. I think looking at new measures is really important. And one thing, this is a bit of a plug for Times Higher, actually, we've produced this world ranking for 18 or so years. But in the last 3 years, we've produced something called the impact rankings, which are actually framed around the Sustainable Development Goals. And they will include a ranking on every single SDG. So we're looking at gender equality, we're looking at eradicating poverty, we're looking at providing food security, climate action. And it's been almost a global movement. Universities have signed up to this en masse. We have it's about 600 in year one, 2019, 800 or so. This year it was more than 1,200 universities all over the world from 96 countries have said, I want to show the impact I have. And it's not just the great research institutions. It's universities producing lots of local healthcare workers in a national context that aren't super prestigious. It's universities with pockets of outstanding activity around sanitation and water. It's universities in the, well, there's just an endless number of examples, but I think reassessing how we measure success, how we recognize success is important for the sector to rethink itself, but also I think really powerful to send that message to the public that, you know, you perhaps don't always appreciate just how much of the things that make your life fun, engaging, interesting, you make your family safe, are the results of universities across a whole range of activities and countries. So I think, Ken, your point about rethinking how we measure success is a big one. And for me, that's one of the bigger long-term issues around repositioning universities. It's not reinventing them, it's simply refocusing that sense of public good, that civic duty, that sense of social responsibility. And I think universities are embracing this all across the world.
Barbara, on any of this, but also a question that came up on a word that you had used, which is very much on people's mind, which is affordability. Have these changes given us new tools to deal with that challenge, or made the challenge more difficult?
I think the answer is yet to be determined. I think we have the opportunity to try to address affordability in new ways, but I don't know that we all have the answer about how we're going to do that. And again, I think that if we don't take some of the things we've learned in this pandemic and build on those to try to address these questions that have been challenges for higher education, then I think we're not doing what we could do and should do. And I would be terribly disappointed if that were the outcome, because as I said, there are actually some silver linings. There are also some really horrible things that we've learned about inequities in our society that the pandemic has brought to the fore. We've had health disparities for years, but you really saw it clearly. And I hope that that's a motivating factor to invest more to try to resolve those things. The digital divide, which has become a huge factor for kids in learning, not just college students, of course, and a lot of universities, and I'll say a lot that are members of my organization, were able to help students who didn't have access, sending out mobile hotspots and that sort of thing. But lots of places didn't have those resources, and the digital divide made it clear. And students are still, missing from school because they have not been able to connect digitally. Not so much a problem at our universities, but a huge problem for our country and for the K through 12 sector as well. So these are things we have an opportunity to address. And I really like what all of us, I think, are saying about the social responsibility we have and the way that universities are embracing that. I think we are. But I also want to point out it's not just universities. I think the corporate sector is embracing this too. And you've seen a big push. Companies have started articulating their values in a way that it's not just about profit. It's about, taking care of people and serving a mission. And we see young people graduating from our universities who want to be involved in some sort of purpose-driven organization. And they're not going to all go to nonprofits. Many of them are going to go in the for-profit world. And so I think companies are embracing this too. So I'm an optimist by nature. That's how I got into higher education. You can't be in my field if you're not an optimist by nature. So I do always see the possibilities, but I am optimistic that some of the tragic lessons that have been revealed through the pandemic and through other events like the tragedies in our own country that we've seen with gun violence, the relationship between police and citizens, and particularly citizens of color, African Americans, the murder of George Floyd. I think we've got motivation right now, and I think the will. And so I am optimistic about lasting change in all these sectors, but we do take our responsibility very seriously and don't take for granted that we have all the answers.
So if I could just jump in really quickly, Adil, on the affordability side, just a slightly different take on that in terms of not access to education, but access to knowledge. One of the things that I was really touched by very early on in the pandemic was a conference run by the University of Cape Town. And it was really, really apparent that the pandemic has actually had the huge potential to open up knowledge to the global South. Even the basics, the UK has got outrageously restrictive visa regimes for academics. We've had Africa summits run in London that have excluded guest speakers because they couldn't get their visas. Terrible, restrictive visa regimes. Breaking those barriers down, breaking the barriers of cost of getting on an aeroplane and spending some time in London or in New York or wherever, all the fees and challenges associated with travel. So I do think there's all these ways of breaking down barriers and the affordability aspect around access to knowledge. And I think also that speaks to movements to open up some of the restrictive journal policies and all the areas there as well. So I think there's a genuine opportunity to, the cliche build back better. Universities are in a position to do this. They've proven they can do it when there's an existential threat to them, as in needing to provide online education overnight. Let's embrace that, as Barbara said. Let's not waste that amazing learning opportunity.
Could I get in
point, which I have also seen, that this not just only I can get guest speakers to my class who I otherwise couldn't, right? That's one way. But the other is, Nobel winners speaking in Malaysia, because now it's not the cost of travel and time, and people want to. And that shakeup is likely to have multiple impacts, including on who travels where for what. And we haven't talked about student mobility. But can I, Scott, if you allow me, you were going to say something. Why don't you say that? And then I want to do a round robin question.
Sure. Well, Barbara is in higher ed, so she's an optimist. I'm a journalist, and so I'm cynical. And I have to say that the trends I see outside of the research universities worry me, because I see faculty tenure threatened at many institutions. On affordability, I see some tuition freezes, some tuition even going down, but not recognition of how little money people have. And I'm just worried that somebody listening to all the great things that the research universities are doing, and they are great things, may miss what's really going on in higher education as a whole.
Sobering points all. On that note, allow me this. Can we have a very quick round robin on this question? If we were to invite you 10 years from now, same panel, same topic, how would our sector be different, do you think? How would it have changed in the next 10 years? Scott,
well,
give us your cynical view first.
Well, but you're BU, you're a great university. You're going to be doing fine. I am really worried about Roxbury Community College and whether they will have the resources. And this isn't because of anything specifically at Roxbury, but will they have the resources to be a good community college? I'm not sure. I worry that 10 years from now, higher ed will be much more have and have not. I view the pandemic as an accelerator of what we have going on. And what we had before was the beginnings of a have not world. And I'm worried that it's going to get worse.
Ken, 10 years from now, what do you think might be one change that our sectors, universities would be different in this way?
I think there will be fewer, larger institutions, and that they'll have to take into account both the community needs as well as the institutional needs. So I'll almost see that, take a place like Boston University, and to help for Roxbury Community College. I think that this may be a bit fantasy, but I could see a Northeastern, a Boston University, of the larger sorts of spaces in this place being much more city regional, and they include the neighborhood as a part of the educational enterprise as well.
Phil, 10 years framework, what might be different?
I think I just, in this context, it's a bit strange, actually. I'm sitting here in the UK, which is a heavily marketized system, a commodified system. Obviously, the US is. It's probably worth mentioning that across the world, there are some outstanding examples of entirely publicly funded higher education systems that are pretty much free to access. That is a huge challenge as we push on and go for mass participation, which I'm a huge believer in. I think we should be very much going towards more and more people getting educated at the higher level. I think society, the economy needs that, but there are some systems out there that are free. But maybe this disruption you mentioned with regards to the digital, the move to remote, the move to digital, maybe there is a genuine opportunity / risk to disrupt the highly commoditized versions where we are looking at very, very large tuition fees. And I think the challenge there is if the universities don't adapt, maybe this is potentially a bit of an old cliche that hasn't come to pass, but I think the opportunity for corporates and private providers and the Coursera's of this world and the edX's of this world and the Zhitang X's of this world to disrupt, to offer people more on demand, more flexible, more bite-size education. The economy, I think, is going to need much more flexible. Lifelong learning is a reality. The post-pandemic recovery is going to require a very different type of, people talk about micro-credentials, but I think the flexibility and the personalization that's been accelerated through this pandemic, if that sticks, that does allow for disruptive providers to come in with a cheaper model, a cheaper way of aggregating content and delivering it differently. So I think there are forces that may be positive in the sense that they apply pressure to the whole system and ask people to really search their models and search how they ensure they are accessible to as many people as possible.
Barbara, same question, 10 years, what do you think might have changed in our sector?
Well, I think we'll be gathering in the same way, in other words, virtually, because I do think we will not be doing as much travel, although I don't think, at least I hope, travel will not go away. I truly believe that those connections that we make when we are face-to-face with other people and experiencing other places, other cultures, that will continue to be valuable, and I hope it always will. But I think we will be doing more virtually. I also think that universities will step into some of the spaces that Phil mentioned of being able, because they will be more flexible, they've learned to be more flexible, they will step into opportunities to provide some of the less than semester long, he called them the bite-sized learning opportunities and the things that people are craving. And I think research is also going to open up. There's already a movement, and we are part of it, to make research available to the public, so that the public that invests in it gets not only the benefit of the things that are created as a result, but actually can access the research directly for free. And so I think that will also have moved dramatically between now, when you end up having to pay for journal subscriptions, and then when it will be much more widely available. And I think that will be good for everybody across the globe. But I do believe that in 10 years, we will still have residential college education.
Thank you. If you allow me to put my own thought on this, if I were to answer my earlier question, I think the student would have changed, meaning which student goes where. And by that, I mean both international mobility choices become different, options become different, and domestic mobility, including through virtual. But as we move towards our end, maybe because we are all sort of, we are all cheerleaders for higher education, whether cynically or optimistically. So in that spirit, if you could, what is the one change you would want to see in higher education happening because we use this moment of transformation to bring it about? Ken, you're shaking your head positively, so let me start with you.
It's been mentioned a bit. Phil, you mentioned it, and so did you, Adil. Time. I think that's a really big, important thing for the future, and that is that we unlock ourselves from the traditional 14 to 16 week semester, the 4 years, the 2 years, those sorts of things, and that we let people learn, even though it may be in person, even though it may be traditional residential, we let you learn at your pace. So I think time would be one of those things I'd like to see get bent in a higher education and a research university space.
Scott, what would you like to see?
I would like to see the leaders of research universities actually spend real time with community colleges and their students, not to recruit them, but to hear from their perspective what's going on in higher ed. And who knows, maybe it would lead to some new policies at the research universities.
Barbara, your wish list?
I'll have to take that as a challenge, Scott. And having developed a great partnership with the community college where I was leading a university, and I am very proud of that, I have done that. And I do think it is an important and worthwhile thing. And I know many of our members have done that as well and believe in the value of community colleges so much. But the crucial opportunity that I see at this moment, and this is a point of real passion and commitment for me, and I did refer to it as a reckoning, because I think our failure to address racial inequity has been a truly horrendous failure. I think we pay for that over and over and over again. And I think if there's one thing that I would like to see, it is that we turn our abilities to be able to make a difference in this world on that in our own country. And I think that will have benefits across the globe as well, because we have a special history with racial inequity, but we're not the only place that deals with this. So I would like to see that. And I mentioned before that I really want to see lasting change here. And that if you come back to me in 10 years and if we haven't made dramatic progress there, I will feel like a huge failure. You can quote me on that.
Just again, as we wrap up, I have in this moment of transformation, again, I'm looking at the longer term, but because we had this experiment, I have been in actual awe of my colleagues in the faculty who transformed sort of literally on a dime, right? Here we didn't lose a single day of class. And seeing the sausage factory, this was not easy. Learning new technologies, learning new ways, sort of revisiting all sorts of ideas. And I've been in equal awe of students being able to do this at a speed and a pace, and often, not always, with a smile, that has left me, as I said, in awe, but also sort of, in pride. So let me turn that into a question. In this moment, what has surprised you, either positively or otherwise, about the ability of those within higher education? What surprised you that you would not have thought would have happened? I literally am in awe of this. Anyone who wants to take it. What has been the big surprise for any of you? Barbara.
I'll jump in, especially because I have to leave because I've got a back-to-back event that I need to log into. But I think what you said is absolutely right. I think the resilience of our communities has been absolutely amazing. Our faculty, our staff, our students. And I also want to say that I was so proud to hear, Phil, was it you who said that we have the bad rap that we never change and that it takes forever? Or was that Scott? I forget which one of you said that, but that comment that we change so quickly when everyone tells us that it takes us forever to change, that was an incredible, wonderful. I mean, I always knew we had the ability to do it, but we did it. And that is an incredibly wonderful thing. And that is one of those things that we take away as a result of this that I hope we can use in the future so that we don't make everything take so long going forward as maybe things used to take in the past in the academic world that I love so much. So thank you for letting me be a part of this.
Thank you so much,
everybody.
for joining us. And the same question, meanwhile, as we thank Barbara. Phil, what surprised you?
Yeah, I mean, it's very difficult to say anything other than that extraordinary resilience. You know, in the UK, we stepped outside our houses every night of once a week, and we clapped and cheered for our health workers. But actually, you know, of course, they are absolutely on the front line, putting themselves in harm's way. But you know, the university faculty, I don't want to overplay their hand, but the commitment to their job, the sheer scale of the challenge, and also now to start thinking about blended approaches and you know, the huge workload issues. I think in the UK in particular, we've already have a real challenge, a real issue with certainly more junior faculty feeling browbeaten, feeling overworked, feeling under immense pressure from various, you know, having to be great teachers and great researchers and great administrators and great community engagers. The sheer pivot, the sheer, well, just reminding people of that absolute commitment to delivering for the student was phenomenal. And just a quick point on the 10-year point. The last trip I made was to Seattle. I was with Microsoft, but I went to UW, and I think it was Anna-Marie Kause. She's coined this term over the course of the about an equicovery. And I do think that for me, the most fundamental thing that we need to come back with is we have to take on the equality issue. And that very much speaks to Scott's point. We have to look at it as a sector-wide issue, and the elite research universities have to take really serious responsibility to opening access in every way they can, whether that's technology, whether that's through new models, whether that's through a radical rethink of admissions, and as to Ken's point, SATs, and how we recognize excellence. I think we should repivot excellence towards social justice, social inclusion, and social impact, which includes being opening our doors and playing a role in healing divisions and being way more inclusive.
And that is not going to be easy, but that is the challenge of our times. But Scott, same thing, what surprised you? We talk about resilience, and resilience has been great, but if you test resilience too often, it is not pleasant.
The biggest surprise is the one already mentioned, the speed with which higher ed was able to shift its teaching models and everything a year ago when they sent their students home, or most of their students home, and started teaching remotely. To do that in a space of a few days, a few weeks, is really remarkable.
Ken?
First off, Phil, it's UW, not UW, UW.
Sorry, I'm an Englishman. Thanks, Ken.
You know, I also second that in terms of what folks said about the pace and the speed that our faculty changed up. But I also need to put a plug in for our staff. We have staff that have done incredible jobs to support faculty, to support students in these endeavors, and to take on some things that many had never in their lives imagined that they'd have to take on. So I've got to throw that in. You know, the other thing that was surprising to me is how much community was built around this, how much time I spent with my colleagues at other schools, especially other schools that would usually say are competitors, and we look at each other that way. But we shared information, we shared policies, we shared memos, we shared a whole lot of things. And just for the lawyers out there, no collusion took place or anything like that. But you know, it was really, first off, very affirming to be in a community of other folk, but particularly folks who don't usually do that with each other. It was phenomenal. And it was important because it was the way that we could get through this together. So I found that a really interesting surprise.
Thank you. I want to thank everyone. This has been a wide-ranging discussion because we wanted it to be so. Given our audience, we have very purposefully wanted it to throw out those big issues. And I thank you for indulging us in that and being so candid. In your answers, I'm not going to summarize because it can't be summarized. But the one thought that does strike me as we conclude this conversation is that it is clear that this feeling that we have in our bones that this is a moment of transformation. It's a moment of disruption, maybe it's a moment of change, but also that it's a moment of opportunity. And each one of you picked up on that idea. And to me, I take some hope from that, because very often when that moment of change comes, sectors do not realize they're in that moment. The one thing I think is quite clear is that there is the introspection. Whether we make the right choices or not, time shall judge. But it is very evident that there is a realization that the universities, higher education is in a moment of transformation, and where choices being made today, whether they are about technology in the classroom, whether they are about equity and justice, whether they are about access or affordability or anything else, or just how institutions are run. But there is a consciousness about that. And I think if any institution should have that consciousness, higher education and learning should. So I wish all of you the best, as I wish myself and our institutions the best in rising to the challenge of this moment.